Ah, Disney. Good old Disney. They do have their share of ups and downs, don't they? On the one hand, they produce some cinematic masterpieces. On the other hand, they produce some absolute crap as well. And one of the periods that produced the most Disney crap was the 80s. Disney hadn't had a hit animated feature since The Rescuers, and they were in trouble. They needed something to get them up out of the toilet. And what did that something turn out to eventually be? Who Framed Roger Rabbit, the live-action animated combination from 1988. So say some. But the film that everyone seems to associate with the Disney Renaissance of the late 80s and early 90s is The Little Mermaid. Based on the Hans Christian Andersen tale, The Little Mermaid was the first Disney animated feature to be based on a fairy tale since Sleeping Beauty. It became a hit and was quickly followed by some of Disney's best and best-known work of the Renaissance, including Beauty and the Beast, Aladdin, and The Lion King. But this story with our beautiful and precocious Maiden of the Sea started it all. Not again.
Matt. Matt, come on.
Forget it, Hatter.
We have a review to do, Matt.
No, we don't. It's a review of Shane.
It's not a review of Shane. It's not a review of Shane just because you don't happen to like it, Matt. The movie has plenty of good things to offer.
You're asking me to accept that this abomination of cinema is even close to being comparable to the 1837 short story by Hans Christian Andersen about a princess of the sea who sacrifices everything for the sake of gaining an immortal soul.
Yes.
Okay, fine.
Thank you. This is Books vs. Movies review of The Little Mermaid.
Now, Matt, we're going to be fair here, right? We're going to look at both the book and the movie objectively, critiquing what's good about them and what's bad about them in order to ultimately determine which one is better, right?
Oh, absolutely. In fact, why don't we get started by taking a look at the ocean's most beautiful maiden versus the ocean's most beautiful bimbo?
Matt.
Here are the title characters. The Little Mermaid is one of Hans Christian Andersen's most recognizable characters. Half human and half sea creature, the Little Mermaid is the youngest of 12 daughters of the King of the Sea. The mermaids of Andersen's story were modeled after the sirens of legend who would sing sailors to their death. From the waist up, they resemble beautiful women, but instead of legs, they had the tail of a sea creature. But Andersen wanted his mermaids to have more pleasant personalities, particularly his main character. All of her life, the Little Mermaid aspires to be more than what she is. She dreams of seeing the land and seeks out stories about it from her grandmother, and later her older sisters, who are each allowed to glimpse the surface upon turning 15. This yearning is reflected in Disney's version of the character named Ariel. Ariel is the fourth Disney princess, if we count in chronological order, and we only count those that made it into the franchise, but she's a little different from the princesses that came before her. Where the other three princesses were passive, submissive, and about as bland as white bread, Ariel was feisty and rebellious. Her father, the overbearing King Triton, forbade her from having anything to do with the land or the humans, but Ariel, being a 16-year-old girl, didn't listen because she should be able to make those decisions for herself, by golly.
I'm 16 years old. I'm not a child.
Don't you take that tone of voice with me, young lady.
Sound familiar? Not only did Ariel get into arguments with her father over this, but she also collected artifacts from the human world and even went up to the surface just to get a glimpse of this magical world of the humans. But that's not the only difference between this Disney princess and her predecessors. This princess is sexy. Being the first to show both cleavage and her midriff, and appearing in both the Nostalgia Critics and IMDb's lists of attractive animated women. Second only in both cases to another redheaded Disney bombshell from that time period, Jessica Rabbit. Guess it was a thing. In addition, Ariel's look, despite the sexiness, is considerably more innocent, highlighting her childlike naivete. And now we've hit upon our first major problem, her naivete, which is the nice term for it, but I'm not going to be nice in this instance, so I'm going to call it stupidity.
Because in both versions, both book and movie, the Little Mermaid does something abominably stupid, making an irrevocable decision for the sake of a guy that she's known all of 2 minutes. Both of which he was unconscious for. Now, in all fairness, the book mermaid does want something other than just the boy, and in fact, the boy is basically just a vehicle for her true desire, which is to gain an immortal soul. As abominations of the sea, the mermaids do not have souls, and return to the sea upon dying, becoming little more than foam. Yeah, Anderson was a bit of an elitist, but the point is, the Little Mermaid does not just want the boy. She wants to live forever. She's doing what she's doing because of her fear of death.
Ariel pretty much just wants the boy. Obviously, Disney's not going to make the social taboo of putting such obvious religious overtone in their movie, so they cut that part of the story out and just made it about forbidden love between two people of two different worlds. But like a lot of Disney heroines, Ariel is convinced that Prince Eric is the one, and that she's unquestioningly in love with him, despite having only just met him. No, not even just met him, just seen him. So, it's basically the infatuation of a 16-year-old girl, but of course Disney being Disney, they treat it like true love. Which, don't get me wrong, is perfectly fine, and is exactly the way it is in the original story as well.
So, the reasons might be different, but the overall method is the same. The Little Mermaid seeks out the Sea Witch, a merwoman of ill repute, but someone who can cast some spells, asks to be made human, and makes some sort of irrevocable deal to do so. In the book, the mermaid is told that she will be permanently human, but with every step she takes, it will feel like knives are digging into her flesh. And if the prince marries someone else besides the Little Mermaid, she will die the morning after the wedding. And just like in the movie, the Little Mermaid has to pay with her voice, but unlike the movie, her voice is not some mystical light that the Sea Witch can then use for herself. Losing her voice literally means having her tongue cut out. So she ain't never getting that voice back.
Ariel basically sells her soul. Kinda. She gets 3 days to get the prince to fall in love with her, which in Disney terms means kiss her, because as we all know, whenever a couple kisses, it must mean they're in love. Or she turns back into a mermaid and becomes Ursula's pet, plant, trinket, I don't know. Anyway, she belongs to the Sea Witch.
So, they both make equally stupid decisions regarding the boy. Here's the difference, though. The book version of The Little Mermaid actually owns up to these decisions. When it becomes clear that the prince fell in love with someone else, you know, of his own species, she accepts the consequences of her actions, even though she's given an out and can be turned back into a mermaid through a comparatively simple action. I mean, okay, she has to kill a guy, but she actually learned something and would be far less likely to make the same decision again. Ariel, on the other hand, learns nothing. And I know that a lot of people, including Siskel and Ebert, two of the greatest film critics of all time, have praised her rebellious nature, saying that she's more independently minded than the previous Disney princesses. Which is perfectly true, though given the fact that the previous Disney princesses at the time were Snow White, Cinderella, and Aurora, that's not really saying much. But a rebellious nature is only good if it leads to something positive, and all it leads to for Ariel is marriage. I mean, not that marriage isn't positive, but think about it. She rebels against the overbearing man in her life so she can have another overbearing man in her life. I mean, have you ever noticed that the only times when Ariel acts out is when she's in danger of not getting what she wants? And understand, when I say not getting what she wants, I mean another trinket for her collection or her man. So basically, Ariel rebels for the sake of a man, does something stupid enough to endanger pretty much everyone she cares about, and is rewarded for it. The result being that she learns absolutely nothing. I could live with Ariel in the first half of the film if it went somewhere, but in the end, Ariel has two redeeming qualities. She looks nice, and she sounds nice. And that's it. Not quite enough to save her for this round.
Feel better?
No, we've still got 4 more rounds to go.
Well, why don't we take a look at one of the things that the movie got right? The antagonist. The Sea Witch from Hans Christian Andersen's story inspires one of Disney's most memorable villains, Ursula, an underwater sorceress who can grant Ariel's request and make her dreams come true. In her song, Poor Unfortunate Souls, which is one of the most kick-ass villain songs ever, she claims that she wants to help those who are less fortunate. Provided that they pay the price, of course. As it happens, however, Ursula has, surprise surprise, no intentions of helping Ariel reach her happily ever after. In fact, she's taking full advantage of Ariel's stupidity in the hopes of taking over King Triton's kingdom. A feat which, I assure you, is not difficult.
Oh, no. I can't stand it. It's too easy.
The book's antagonist has no such ambition. She's shady to be sure, but she's not evil. In fact, she's not even really an antagonist. I mean, she doesn't act against the Little Mermaid in any way other than to grant her request. Which I'll grant you is a pretty diabolical thing to do in this case. If there is an antagonist in this story, it's the girl that the prince ended up marrying. After the prince was rescued from drowning by the Little Mermaid, he was taken in by a nearby house of worship where he met and fell in love with one of the priestesses who cared for him, ostensibly confusing her with the Little Mermaid, though I would dispute this. She's an antagonist only in the purest sense of the word, however. That is, the Little Mermaid wants to marry the prince, and she stands in her way by her mere existence. But she doesn't act against the Little Mermaid, and there's no indication that she's nasty or mean-spirited, let alone evil.
The Disney movie basically takes the two characters from the story that could conceivably be construed as antagonists and kind of smooshes them together into the character of Ursula. As the likelihood of Ariel and Eric... Ariel and Eric, I just got that. As the likelihood of Ariel and Eric sharing that magic kiss increases, Ursula feels the need to intervene, and so uses Ariel's voice to transform herself into a beautiful woman named Vanessa. She then bewitches Eric to fall in love with her instead of Ariel, and they have the most hastily planned wedding in history. And when the time limit expires, she abandons the disguise and takes Ariel down to her lair. She then uses her life as barter with King Triton and ends up becoming Queen of the Sea herself. Like I said, it really is almost too easy. Ursula knows the weaknesses of the characters, Prince Eric's desire for the right girl, King Triton's love for his daughter, and Ariel's sheer stupidity, and exploits them all beautifully.
But this doesn't change the fact that Disney is essentially using the character of Ursula to make something sinister that is completely innocent. Like they're saying, no, the handsome prince couldn't possibly fall in love with somebody other than the protagonist. She must be evil. Disney does have a tendency to do this, assuming that anyone who stands in the way, however passively, of true love, in this case meaning the kind of infatuation that is spawned by 2 minutes of togetherness, must be the horrid spawn of Satan. And we won't even get into the complete raping of an interesting character that the Sea Witch got in favor of having a true villain. In this round, anyway.
No, this round is reserved for which character made the better antagonist, and seeing as how the original story doesn't really have an antagonist, the movie pretty much wins by default. But aside from that, Ursula is just a kick-ass villain, cleverly playing off the sheer stupidity of our protagonist. To the point where you're almost rooting for her rather than for Ariel. And, for me anyway, Ursula is one of the few redeeming qualities of the movie. But how about the other characters from Under the Sea and On the Land?
Okay, I might be cheating a little bit here, but I think we need to start by talking about the Sea Witch, because she's really not an antagonist. The Sea Witch is, in fact, completely honest with the Little Mermaid. She tells her exactly what she's going to go through, exactly how much pain she's going to be in, and what will happen to her if she doesn't marry the prince. To say nothing of the price, which I think is almost the Sea Witch's way of trying to deter the Little Mermaid from doing what she's about to do. Also, she does give the Little Mermaid an out in the end, providing her with a way to not die when the prince gets married, but rather to become a mermaid again. It's not a great out as it involves killing the prince, but it's an out nonetheless. And for this, she only charges the price of her sister's hair, which is not nearly as drastic as having one's tongue cut out. The Sea Witch, though apparently bound by some obscure rules we don't know about, does seem to want to help the Little Mermaid, at least a little.
But let's look at the characters that we haven't actually looked at yet. I think my favorite from the movie is probably King Triton, a fairly overbearing and at times threatening father figure, and yet it's clear that he loves his daughter. I know we're supposed to find his personality needlessly aggressive and that he's squelching her dreams or whatever, but honestly, Ariel is such a bratty bimbo in the beginning that I honestly can't blame him for acting the way that he does. And in the end, it's his sacrifice that saves Ariel.
But as far as I'm concerned, all that is completely botched by the ending, when after endangering the kingdom and everything they hold dear, he not only doesn't punish the Little Mermaid, but gives her exactly what she wants. Really, Triton? What the hell? Now, admittedly, her father doesn't get a lot of time in the original story at all, but the Little Mermaid does have a grandmother who acts as something of a maternal figure to her. This is the woman who tells the Little Mermaid a lot of the stories about the land and kind of acts as an antithesis to the Sea Witch. The Disney movie was apparently going to include this character at one point, but decided for whatever reason not to. The sisters are also downplayed considerably. In the book, we get to see what each of the sisters sees as they go to explore the land for the first time. They each have their own personalities, they each visit the Little Mermaid several times when she becomes human, and they're the ones who go and try to find an out for the Little Mermaid so she doesn't have to die.
Fulfilling the role of Disney's sisters in the movie, we have the obligatory animal friends, who essentially fall into the basic Disney stereotypes. You got Flounder, the loyal and at times wimpy best friend, Scuttle, the clueless comic relief who ends up saving the day, and Sebastian, the crusty, crabby, get it, curmudgeon-like guardian. But in their own way, these three characters really do fill the role of Ariel's family. They care about her and are concerned for her welfare, and though stereotypical, they're certainly likable enough and give the heavier moments of the film some lightheartedness. And of course, there's the love interest, Prince Eric, who is probably one of Disney's better love interests, especially in comparison to the princes who came before him. He's also possibly the only character in this movie who actually has some growth, learning to appreciate what's right in front of him rather than keeping his head in the clouds. Would that Ariel could have learned that same lesson. Regardless, he still has all the makings of a perfect Prince Charming-like character. And I do think that the relationship between the Little Mermaid and the prince is more interesting in the original story. For one thing, it's longer. But also because his fondness for her is clear, but so is the fact that he doesn't want to marry her. Or at least that he's holding out for somebody else. In fact, he does actually say at one point that should he not find this girl that he's looking for, he will accept the Little Mermaid as his wife, but that's not really the type of statement that sweeps a girl off her feet. But then she only wants him for his soul anyway, so there you go. Both stories focus on the mermaid, and neither one really puts a lot of focus on the other characters, but I think I'm going to lean towards the book on this one. And trust me, the characters from the movie are a lot more likable, but the characters in the book are just more interesting and better fleshed out. And when all is said and done, I'm more interested in the characters from the original story than I am in the cardboard cutout characters from Disney. So now let's look at another saving grace from the movie, the imagery. Say what you will about the story and the characters, but you cannot deny that this is a really nice looking film. The animation, even 20 years later, is really impressive. It's clear that the animators worked hard to make sure that the underwater scenes really look like they're underwater, and the effort shows. The motion of everything, the color scheme, the bubbles, it really does look as though you've been transported into another world, and the quality of the work still holds up today. The imagery of the book was largely inspired by Hans Christian Andersen's perception of southern Italy. And of course, it's Hans Christian Andersen, which means that there's a lot of religious imagery as well. The depth of the sea is measured in church steeples, the prince is brought to shore by a house of worship, and of course the theme of the Little Mermaid gaining an immortal soul just permeates the story. But then the religious imagery does have a tendency to permeate a bit too much. Andersen always seeks to teach a lesson in his stories, and at times, a lot of times, he gets on his soapbox and really hammers the point to death, and a lot of this comes through in the imagery. The animation in the movie is just nice to look at. And we can't ignore the music, that's part of imagery as well. Aside from Poor Unfortunate Souls, songs like Part of Your World and Under the Sea are instantly recognizable for how beautiful and catchy they are. And the score for the movie is also very good. The animation and the music are really what makes this movie stand out, and it's definitely a big part of what ushered in the Disney Renaissance. Like I've said, if you completely ignore the characters in the story, this is a really great film. And now we compare the beautiful story of sacrificing humanity to the trite, formulaic story of... to the overly simplified and polarized story of... Come on, we've talked about this.
Alright, fine. Disney versus Andersen. Who tells a better story? Hatter, I think you'd better go first.
Alright. This movie has gained a great deal of popularity, and it's easy to see why. The music is great, the animation is great, the protagonist is charming and has relatable qualities, the villain is one of Disney's best, and it has the type of feel-good happy ending that you've come to expect from a Disney movie. And Andersen's story, let's face it, doesn't. Like many of Andersen's stories, The Little Mermaid is exceptionally depressing because, again, like many of Andersen's stories, the main character dies. Not only that, but she suffers a great deal before she does, and that suffering is described pretty graphically. Andersen enjoyed writing stories about suffering because he believed that suffering was necessary and that those who suffered greatly would eventually be rewarded. As such, many of his heroes and heroines met with very messy and painful ends. It's also pretty obvious that Anderson had a religious agenda. That, coupled with the pain that the Little Mermaid goes through, makes this story incredibly hard to read sometimes. Additionally, the ending is actually pretty disturbing. After dying, the Little Mermaid becomes a daughter of the air, a spirit who can eventually gain an immortal soul, after some 300 years of making people happy. That's all fine and good, but then the story goes on to say that every time a child cries, the Little Mermaid gets another day added to her service. What the hell, Anderson? I mean, obviously it's supposed to be a moralistic story for kids, but seriously? Now, Billy, I know you broke your leg and all, but if you cry, it'll just take the Little Mermaid that much longer to find eternal bliss, so just be happy! But, here's my thing. If you're going to make a movie adaptation of a book, if you stay true to nothing else, stay true to the message. Or, if that message is less than savory, which admittedly may be the case here, stay congruent or improve upon it. Disney's movie doesn't. And let me be very clear here, my problem is not that they gave the story a happy ending. This story can work with a happy ending. I have seen it work with a happy ending. But as far as I'm concerned, the movie completely negates the themes of suffering, sacrifice, and owning up to the consequences of your actions that are so strong and clear in the book. Say what you will about the Little Mermaid's grisly end, but she pays the price necessary, she owns up to her actions, and she sacrifices herself rather than take the easy way out. Ariel, on the other hand, suffers not at all, makes no sacrifice, and in fact does nothing to bring down Ursula or save herself, her father, or her father's kingdom, and rather than paying the consequences for her actions, gets exactly what she wants in the end. And I don't have a problem with changing the theme entirely, but you have to replace it with something of substance. The theme of the movie seems to be follow your dreams with absolutely no regard for whether those dreams are logical, realistic, or in any way intelligent, and no matter how badly you screw things up, don't worry, you'll get your way in the end as long as you're pretty enough. I know it's a popular movie, and I don't fault people for liking it, and I will be the first to admit that the original story has plenty of flaws. But as far as I'm concerned, the movie is not an improvement. There. I went through this preposterous exercise.
Wasn't preposterous, Matt.
Really? Wasn't preposterous? Everyone knew going in that Book was gonna win this one.
True, but now you have a logical and reasonable argument to make against the movie without sounding like a raving purist. Although you still did kind of sound like a raving purist.
Okay, fine. Whatever. It's done. I am done with this review. I don't even care what comes next. Nothing could possibly be worse than